Ma'am,
What
if
are
you
they
just,
trying to prove? Are you trying to say that there's an emergency around me? Is that what they're trying to say?
if you just stop your car, they will handle it with you.
Why in the world would they need to stop my car when there's no emergency?
I have no idea.
That's like telling me to pull over for an emergency when there's not one. But I can say that point. Well, what is the emergency? Tell me what the emergency is, because I can see that your emergency.
Okay, so that was Jenna the Sovereign Citizen referencing one of the weirdest Sovereign Citizen memes that I've run across. And that is the claim that if a police officer uses his emergency lights, he can't use them to pull you over because that's declaring a false state of emergency and something unlawful, therefore they can't pull you over. I was reminded of it because it's also referenced in this little Eddie Craig action script, which is a little script that he hands out with information of what to do if you're pulled over by police. It's some of the worst legal advice I've ever seen, and it's also referenced in this little type of sovereign citizen style blog. And but before we get into the actual law, part of what's so bizarre about this one is that it flies against just basic common sense and just what most of us experience in a day-to-day life. I mean, most people have experienced a cop pulling up behind you, flashing his lights to get you to pull over. That's a normal everyday occurrence. But in these people's minds, it's absolutely unlawful, and it's this huge outrage. And just to drive the point home, I mean, even if you lived in a cave and your only interaction with the outside world was movies and television, this should not be a surprise.
Oh my God.
Oh, cute. No, come on.
Through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain.
Woo! Barracuda! Oh, fuck! Fuck me!
Mama, is this really the end? To be stuck here.
Oh, you evil bastard. This is your work. You better take care of me, Lord. If you don't, you're gonna have me on your hands.
Yeah. Oh, motherfucking fuck! God!
Now, that's just a collection of the first few videos that I can find of scenes from television or movies in which somebody is pulled over by the police. And you can see that it's a very distinctive auditory and visual cue. I think most people understand instinctively that if a cop behind you turns his lights on and starts flashing the siren, that's a signal for you to pull over, and that goes to the very basic common sense here. How else is a cop supposed to tell you to pull over if you're doing, say, 45 miles per hour on the middle of the street? Is he just supposed to, wave at you? What exactly is the position of the sovereign citizen in this situation? But anyways, you might argue movies are not accurate representations of law. However, in this situation, fortunately, it is. I'm just going to focus on California statutes here, just because going over 50 states would take forever. Now, if we go to statutes, we can see that police are allowed to use emergency lights, and the specific statute is 25259, quote, and any authorized emergency vehicle may display flashing amber lights to the front, sides, or rear. A vehicle operated by police or a traffic officer while in the actual performance of his or her duties may display steady burning or flashing white lights to either side mounted above the roofline. Now, in Jenna's call, you heard that the argument was that somebody was making a false emergency report. Now, in California, that specific statute reads as follows. Any individual who reports to any city department, blah, 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 that an emergency exists, knowing that the report is false, is guilty of a misdemeanor. Now, if you read it, that would not apply to emergency lights, because the cop is not making a report to the city or state department. He's signaling you to pull over. And as far as I can tell, the entire argument here is that because the lights are called emergency lights, then they must be signaling an emergency. But that's not, I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Now, we're going to skip over to Kansas because this is the best case I could find that discusses the issue. We go down to a section called emergency lights. Let's go down a little bit further. The presence or absence of emergency lights may or may not be significant. Emergency lights may signify different meanings under different circumstances. For example, when emergency lights are activated to initiate a traffic stop, there's a clear signal of seizure. In fact, it is unlawful for a driver to fail to stop when a police officer signals the driver by using emergency lights. It states the statute KSA 818568, fleeing and eluding. So, I mean, very basically, there's nothing unlawful about using emergency lights to signal you to pull over. And it's in plain, absolutely plain English. Quote, it's unlawful for you to fail to stop when a cop signals you with emergency lights. And here is Erickson v. State, which is from, let's look it up, 2003. Quote, where was it? Courts have routinely held that an officer's use of emergency lights evidences an investigatory stop rather than a consensual encounter, because the emergency lights lead the citizen to believe that he or she is not free to leave. This is Texas v. Little from 2008. Explains that the use of emergency lights or sirens is discretionary. It gives the specific statute, which I looked up. It gives a whole all the damn rules about when you can use sirens and lights in Texas. This is United States v. Cone, 2016. So that's completely pretty damn new. Where were we? Quote, it is true that most traffic stops occur on the road and police are required to use emergency lights to alert a driver to pull over to allow a police officer to conduct an investigative detention. But there is no authority suggesting that a traffic stop must occur in this fashion. This is People v. Johnson, 2012. Quote, it's clear that defendant here knew that he was being stopped by police when the officers activated their emergency lights and he attempted to flee. This is from State v. Bell, a Minnesota case, but which is slightly related. Quote, in Hansen, the Supreme Court concluded that an objectively reasonable interpretation of the officer's decision to use emergency lights was that he was warning motorists of the stopped car. So that's another legitimate use of emergency lights that does not involve declaring an emergency. That's there's a stopped car, the cop can turn his emergency lights on to get people to slow down. This is Dane County v. Lamb, 2012. There's another indirect discussion of emergency lights. In Kramer, the court found that the use of emergency lights was not an overt act of authority or force, but a reasonable safety feature. The lights warned other drivers that the vehicles were parked on the shoulder of the road. This is State v. Marler. This is where Louisiana, I think. Yeah, Louisiana. First survey. Where was I? While activating emergency lights may be used as a show of police force, of police authority, in this situation, use of emergency lights was a very prudent course of action for the safety of the officers, defendant, and anyone else who may have come upon the scene. So to sum this all up, yes, of course cops can use emergency lights to signal you to pull over. I mean, how else are they supposed to do that? This is just another example of just how culturally isolated the sovereign citizen movement is. I mean, this is a belief that defies common sense. It defies just day-to-day normal experiences. It defies just basic intuition and common knowledge of how traffic stops work. And it goes against what the actual statutes and laws of the United States and all 50 states state a police can and cannot do.